future wife. There's something I need to tell you before we ever meet. There was a time when I almost became someone you wouldn't recognize, someone distant, someone cold, someone who stopped believing in love because life kept teaching him lessons through loss. I carried battles inside me that nobody could see. I smiled when I was breaking. I kept walking when every part of me wanted to stop. And with every disappointment, every goodbye, every sleepless night, I felt myself changing into a man I never wanted to become. But somehow the thought of you kept me going, not because I knew your name, not because I knew where you were, but because deep in my heart I believed there was a reason I was surviving all of this, a reason I kept choosing kindness when bitterness felt easier, a reason I kept protecting the soft parts of my heart when the world kept giving me reasons to close them forever. The truth is, my love, I almost became someone you wouldn't recognize, but I fought my way back. And if you're listening to this one day, I want you to know that every battle I won was preparing me to love you the way you deserve to be loved. Future wife, before you know me, before you hear my laughter, before you learn the small things that make me who I am, there is something I need you to understand. There was a time when I almost became someone you wouldn't recognize, not because I wanted to, not because I was born that way, but because life has a strange way of changing people when they carry pain for too long. There were years when I walked through the world feeling invisible, years when I kept every wound hidden behind a smile, years when I learned how to survive instead of how to live. The truth is, nobody sees the quiet battles. People notice when someone succeeds. People notice when someone falls, but they rarely notice the moments in between, the moments when a person sits alone at night questioning everything, the moments when their heart is breaking and they tell everyone they're okay, the moments when they stare at the ceiling wondering how much longer they can keep carrying what nobody else can see. I had those moments, more than I can count. There were days when disappointment became so familiar that I stopped expecting good things. Days when I convinced myself that hoping only led to heartbreak. Days when trusting people felt dangerous. Every goodbye left a mark. Every broken promise built another wall around my heart. Every betrayal whispered the same lie. Stop caring. Stop believing. Stop opening your heart. And for a while I listened, not completely, but enough to become quieter, enough to become colder, enough to stop recognizing parts of myself. I remember looking in the mirror and seeing someone tired, not physically. Soul tired, the kind of tired that sleep cannot fix, the kind that comes from carrying too many memories, too many regrets, too many unanswered questions. I kept moving forward because I had no choice. Life doesn't stop when your heart is hurting. Bills still need to be paid, responsibilities still exist, people still expect you to function, so you learn how to smile when you're hurting, you learn how to say you're fine when you're falling apart, you learn how to hide the storm, and eventually, hiding becomes a habit. The dangerous thing about pain isn't that it hurts. The dangerous thing is that if it stays long enough, it starts changing you. It changes the way you see people. It changes the way you see yourself. It changes the way you love. I started believing that maybe being emotionally distant was safer, maybe caring less would hurt less, maybe expecting nothing would protect me from disappointment, maybe building walls was smarter than building connections, and little by little, I drifted toward becoming someone I never wanted to be, someone guarded, someone disconnected, someone who had forgotten how beautiful vulnerability could be. I wasn't cruel. I wasn't angry at the world. I was simply exhausted, exhausted from losing, exhausted from hoping, exhausted from rebuilding myself over and over again. You can only start over so many times before you begin wondering if it's worth trying anymore. And there were moments when I truly wondered. Moments when giving up emotionally seemed easier than fighting, moments when loneliness felt safer than connection, moments when silence felt safer than honesty. I watched other people fall in love. I watched them trust. I watched them believe in things I was struggling to believe in. Part of me admired them. Part of me envied them because somewhere along the way, I had forgotten what it felt like to trust life, to trust people, to trust love. The world can teach hard lessons. Sometimes it teaches them gently, sometimes it teaches them through loss, and sometimes it teaches them repeatedly until you think you'll never recover. I carried scars nobody knew about, stories I never told, memories I never shared, not because they were secrets, but because some pain is difficult to explain. How do you explain the nights you cried without making a sound? How do you explain the loneliness you felt in crowded rooms? How do you explain the fear of becoming emotionally numb? How do you explain losing pieces of yourself while pretending everything is okay? You don't. You carry it quietly, you keep walking, you keep surviving, and that's exactly what I did. I survived, but survival isn't the same thing as living. There is a difference, a huge difference. Survival keeps your heart beating. Living makes your heart feel alive. And for a long time, I wasn't truly alive. I was existing, moving, working, smiling, breathing. But inside, something felt missing. Something important, something human. I think what was missing was hope. Not hope for success, not hope for money, not hope for achievements, hope for connection, hope that someone would understand me without needing an explanation, hope that one day I would meet someone who could see beyond the walls, someone patient enough to understand why they existed, someone kind enough not to judge the scars, someone strong enough not to run away when they discovered how much pain I had carried. And even though I hadn't met you yet, something inside me refused to completely give up. It was small, fragile, quiet, but it was there. A tiny part of my heart kept believing that my story wasn't over, that maybe all the pain had a purpose, that maybe all the lessons were preparing me for something, or someone may be preparing me for you, because when I think about it now, I realize something important. The version of me that almost disappeared wasn't the real me. The version of me that almost became cold wasn't the real me. The version of me that almost stopped believing wasn't the real me. Those were reactions to pain. Those were survival mechanisms. Those were temporary versions created by difficult seasons. Deep down, beneath every disappointment, I was still myself, still capable of kindness, still capable of love, still capable of hope. I just needed a reason to remember. I needed something to remind me that life was bigger than my heartbreak, bigger than my failures, bigger than my fears, and slowly, without even realizing it, I started finding my way back. Not all at once. Healing never works that way. It happened in small moments, tiny moments, moments that most people would overlook. A peaceful sunrise, a meaningful conversation, a random act of kindness, a reminder that good people still exist, a reminder that beauty still exists, a reminder that my heart was still capable of feeling something. Those moments became lifelines. They pulled me back toward myself, back toward the person I wanted to be, back toward the person I hoped you would someday meet, because I didn't want to become bitter. I didn't want pain to define me. I didn't want my wounds to become my identity. I wanted to remain gentle in a world that often rewards hardness. I wanted to remain compassionate in a world that sometimes lacks compassion. I wanted to remain hopeful even when hope felt difficult. That choice wasn't easy. Some days it still isn't. There are still moments when old fears return, old wounds whisper, old memories hurt. But now I understand something I didn't understand before. Pain can change you, but it doesn't have to become you. You can experience heartbreak without becoming heartless. You can experience betrayal without becoming distrustful forever. You can experience loss without losing your ability to love. You can suffer without surrendering your humanity. And that realization saved me, because there was a point when I almost lost sight of who I was, a point when I almost became someone you wouldn't recognize, someone disconnected from his own heart, someone trapped behind emotional walls, someone afraid to love, someone afraid to be loved. But I kept fighting quietly, potently, imperfectly, one day at a time, one lesson at a time, one scar at a time. And with every step forward, I began reclaiming pieces of myself. The kindness returned, the hope returned, the faith returned, not perfectly, not completely, but enough to keep going, enough to believe again, enough to imagine a future that wasn't defined by pain, enough to imagine you, a woman I hadn't met, a face I hadn't seen, a voice I hadn't heard, yet somehow the thought of you became part of my healing, because if someone as wonderful as you existed somewhere in this world, then becoming cold was not an option, becoming bitter was not an option, giving up on love was not an option. I wanted to become the kind of man who could recognize your heart when our paths finally crossed. I wanted to become the kind of man who could love you without letting old wounds interfere. I wanted to become the kind of man who carried wisdom instead of bitterness, strength instead of anger, compassion instead of fear. And so I kept growing, I kept healing, I kept choosing light when darkness felt easier, I kept choosing softness when hardness felt safer, I kept choosing hope when despair felt more familiar. Because somewhere ahead, even before I knew your name, I believed you deserved the best version of me, not a perfect version, not an unscarred version, but an honest version, a healed version, a version that remembered who he truly was. Future wife, If there is one truth I hope you always remember about me, it is this: love brought me back to myself, not all at once, not through some dramatic moment where everything suddenly changed overnight. It happened slowly, quietly. The way sunrise replaces darkness without asking for attention. For a long time, I believed strength meant carrying everything alone. I thought being strong meant never needing anyone, never depending on anyone, never letting anyone see the parts of me that were broken, so I carried my burdens in silence. I carried old disappointments, old heartbreaks, old fears. I convinced myself that if I could survive everything on my own, then I would never get hurt again. But surviving and living are not the same thing. Surviving taught me how to endure pain. Love taught me why enduring it mattered. Before I knew you, before our paths crossed, before I could even imagine what your voice sounded like, there was something inside me that kept fighting to stay alive, not my body, my heart. Because despite everything I had been through, despite all the reasons I had to stop believing, there was still a part of me that refused to give up on love. Some people think love begins when two people meet. I don't believe that. I think love begins much earlier. I think it begins in the moments when we choose kindness instead of bitterness, when we choose hope instead of surrender, when we choose to keep our hearts open even after they've been wounded. I think love was already working on me long before I ever knew your name. There were nights when I felt completely alone, nights when the future looked uncertain, nights when my thoughts became heavier than my heart could carry, and during those moments, I often wondered if all the pain had a purpose. I wondered if every lesson, every disappointment, every scar was preparing me for something I couldn't see yet. I wondered if somewhere in this enormous world there was a person whose existence would make all of it make sense, a person who would help me understand why I survived what I survived, a person who would remind me that none of my suffering was wasted. Maybe that person was you, because whenever I imagined the future, whenever I imagined meeting the woman I would spend my life with, something inside me softened. The anger became quieter, the fear became smaller, the loneliness became easier to carry. The idea of you became a light in places where darkness had lived for too long, not because I expected you to save me. You were never responsible for healing my wounds. That was my responsibility. But the possibility of you reminded me why healing mattered. It reminded me why becoming better mattered, why growing mattered, why refusing to give up mattered, because someday I wanted to meet you with a whole heart, not a perfect heart, a whole one, a heart that still believed in kindness, a heart that still believed in loyalty, a heart that still believed in love. There was a version of me that almost disappeared, a version of me that almost became distant from the world, a version of me that almost stopped feeling. Pain was pulling me in that direction. Loss was pulling me in that direction. Fear was pulling me in that direction, but love kept pulling me back. Not romantic love at first, just love itself. The love found in simple moments. The love found in human connection. The love found in compassion. The love found in second chances. The love found in forgiveness. Those small experiences reminded me that the world wasn't as cold as my pain had convinced me it was. Every act of kindness became proof. Every genuine conversation became proof. Every beautiful moment became proof. Proof that goodness still existed. Proof that hope still existed. Proof that my story wasn't finished. And slowly I began finding pieces of myself again. The parts I thought I had lost forever. The dreamer returned. The believer returned. The man who still wanted to love returned. I began noticing beauty again. The sound of rain. The quiet peace of early mornings. The warmth of laughter. The comfort of meaningful conversations, things I had stopped appreciating when survival became my only focus. Love helped me notice them again. It reminded me that life isn't only about pain, life is also about connection, about gratitude, about presence, about finding reasons to smile even when circumstances aren't perfect. And the more I embraced that truth, the more I started recognizing myself, not the wounded version, not the exhausted version, the real version, the version hidden underneath all the scars. I think that's one of the greatest gifts love can give us. It helps us remember who we are, not who the world tried to turn us into, not who our failures convinced us we were, not who our fears told us to become, but who we truly are. Love strips away the masks, the defenses, the walls, and reveals the person underneath, the person who was there all along. I imagine that one day you'll ask me about my past, you'll ask me about the struggles, the heartbreaks, the difficult years, and I'll tell you the truth. I'll tell you there were moments when I felt lost, moments when I questioned everything, moments when I wasn't sure if happiness would ever find me, But I'll also tell you something else. I'll tell you that those moments didn't win, because every challenge taught me something valuable. Every setback taught me resilience. Every disappointment taught me wisdom. Every painful chapter prepared me to appreciate love when it finally arrived, prepared me to appreciate you. Because when you've spent years searching for light, you don't take it for granted when it finally appears. You cherish it, you protect it, you honor it. That's how I imagine loving you, not as someone who believes love is guaranteed, but as someone who understands how precious it truly is, someone who understands how rare it is to find a person who feels like home, a person who understands your silence, a person who sees your flaws and chooses you anyway, a person who stands beside you during ordinary days and difficult seasons alike. I don't know where you are right now. I don't know what you're doing. I don't know what battles you're fighting, but I hope you're healing too. I hope you're learning that your scars don't make you less worthy of love. I hope you're learning that your past doesn't define your future. I hope you're learning that difficult seasons eventually pass, because just as love brought me back to myself, I hope it is guiding you back to yourself too. Maybe we're both learning the same lessons in different places. Maybe we're both becoming stronger in ways we don't yet understand. Maybe we're both being prepared for a future we can't see. And maybe that's why we haven't met yet, because growth takes time. Healing takes time. Becoming the people we're meant to be takes time. There are parts of me that needed rebuilding, parts that needed understanding, parts that needed forgiveness. And through all of it, love remained the quiet force guiding me forward, not demanding, not rushing, just patiently leading me toward the man I was always meant to become, a man who understands that vulnerability is not weakness, a man who understands that kindness is strength, a man who understands that love is not something to fear, a man who understands that opening your heart is worth the risk because the alternative is far worse. The alternative is living behind walls forever. The alternative is never allowing yourself to be known. The alternative is letting fear make your decisions, and I refuse to live that way. I refuse to let pain write the final chapter of my story. I refuse to let disappointment define my future. I refuse to let fear stop me from loving deeply, because love gave me my life back. Love reminded me how to hope. Love reminded me how to dream. Love reminded me how to trust again. Love reminded me how to believe in tomorrow. And most importantly, love reminded me who I am, not the man shaped by his wounds, not the man shaped by his losses, but the man shaped by his ability to keep choosing light despite them, the man who kept his heart open, the man who kept believing, the man who never stopped searching for something beautiful, the man who never stopped believing that somewhere in this world there was a future wife worth becoming better for.